உள்ளூர் நிகழ்வுகளையும் முக்கிய செய்திகளையும் உடனுக்குடன் தெரிந்து கொள்ள லோக்கல் தமிழ் ட்ரெண்ட்ஸ் யூடியூப் சேனலுக்கு சப்ஸ்கிரைப் செய்யுங்கள். இந்த வீடியோவை லைக் பண்ணுங்க, ஷேர் பண்ணுங்க, கமெண்ட் பண்ணுங்க. மேலும் அப்டேட்ஸ்க்காக எங்கள் லோக்கல் தமிழ் ட்ரெண்ட்ஸ் சேனலை சப்ஸ்கிரைப் பண்ணுங்க.
Welcome back. We're going to continue right where we left off. Previously, we had finished setting up these two class-based views, and we set up the models as well. We have the list view, which is going to list out all the schools that are in the school model. And then we also have the school detail view, which is going to show all the details of a specific entry in that school model database. And that includes things like showing all the students for a particular school. What we need to do is set up the templates and then set up the urls.py file. So it really doesn't matter what order you do this in. You can set up the urls.py file first and then set up the templates, or do the templates first and then set up the urls.py. It makes sense either way since they're basically codependent on each other. We'll start off with the templates, and we should always start off with the base template. That makes the most sense since we're going to be extending that into the other pages. So I'm right now under the templates folder that's in the same directory level as the project and the application. So there's my project folder, application folder, and then templates folder, base HTML, and index HTML. Let's take care of this. What would be nice to add in here is a navigation bar that can take us to the various pages. So we'll call nav, and we will give this class equal to, and this is one of those kind of quirky bootstrap names. It's navbar space navbar dash default, and then we'll say navbar dash static dash top. And then inside of this navbar, we have an unordered list, and that also takes in a special bootstrap class, which, again, quirky name, navbar dash nav. Okay, so let's have 3 items in this actual navbar. So we'll have 3 list elements inside of this unordered list, and each of these is actually also going to be an anchor tag, since they're going to link to other pages on our page. And what we're going to be doing is using URL template tagging. But before we do that, let's actually give these anchor tags their bootstrap classes. The first one is going to be navbar-brand. Remember, this is kind of the brand that usually takes you back to the home page. In our case, what we're going to do is once we set up the urls.py file, we will have a URL inside the basic app, and we'll give it the list. And let me collapse the directory tree here for a second so we can see everything here. And I'm going to give this the name schools. So in our navbar, all the way to the left as the brand, there's going to be larger text that says schools, and if someone clicks on that, they should then see a list of all the schools, and that utilizes the list view. Then we're going to have 2 more links here, and this will just be navbar-link as the class, and inside of this is going to be another URL template. And this is just going to be to the admin page. In case we ever want to quickly go to the admin page, I can say admin:index, and let's just make this say admin. So that takes us directly to the admin page, and we'll just have an empty thing right here, because later on we'll add a 3rd link, but right now we can just keep it empty. And I'm actually going to do Control-A or Command-A, depending on your operating system, and then copy all of this. So select it all, copy it, and I'm going to bring it into under basic app, templates, basic app underscore base. I'm going to paste that all in here because I essentially want it to have the same navigation bar in the basic app base.html. So I will save that. And now let's come back to our home page. This is index.html under the templates folder that's in the same directory as the project. And I'm going to just get rid of all this. And let's put in a Jumbotron and say something like homepage. Save that. And right now, base.html and index.html are done. Let's go to basic app base, school detail, and school list and see how we can add something to those templates. So we'll start off with the school list.html. And what we're going to do here is say extends, and we'll extend from basic_app/basic_app_base.html, and that matches the base HTML file for our specific templates application. Or I should say application templates. And we'll start off the block So we'll call block body underscore block. And then because we're calling that, we also want to make sure we call an end block. And now what we can do is say header 1, and we'll call this welcome to a list of all the schools. Save that. And then what I will do here is have an ordered list. And inside this ordered list, I'm going to have template tagging with a for loop. I'll say for school in school underscore list. I'll say h2, have some heading here, a list item, h2 just so it looks a little larger instead of just a paragraph. And then we'll have this be even like a link. But right now we'll just say school and then grab the name of that school. And let me end that for, so the end for should go here. So I'm going to say end for. And what you're probably wondering right now is, where does this term come from? School underscore list. Well, we're familiar with context dictionaries, but you probably don't remember us actually defining school underscore list in the context dictionary of views.py. So if I jump over to views.py, here inside this school list view, we don't see any mention of the variable school underscore list. So again, where does this actually come from? School underscore list. Do we have to define this by ourselves with some sort of call to a context dictionary? And the list view object right here that we inherit from actually is doing the work of creating that context dictionary and returning it for you. In fact, what it does is it takes the model you called, lowercases everything, and then adds underscore list. So for instance, if I'm calling models.school, essentially what it's doing, and this is just going to be in comments, it returns a list with the name school underscore list. So this thing lowercase, and then it adds in underscore list. Now, if you're working by yourself, that may be fine. But usually for larger projects, you have someone working with the front end and another person working on the back end, or teams, etc. And you want to make sure that you're not constantly changing stuff, and maybe they're not even aware of list views and things being called as an underscore list. So it might be better if you decide on your own terms what you want this actual object to be called. So what might make sense is for this to be called schools. Well, how do we actually affect views.py to call the context object that gets returned whatever we want? Thankfully, it's really easy. What you end up doing is using a class object attribute. So here, you just say context underscore object underscore name is equal to, and then whatever you want. In this case, we wanted schools. So here you can define your own context object name that's going to return the list of all the schools inside that model school. So if you come back here, then we can just match this up with schools. Okay, and that's probably usually what you're going to be seeing. That way you're fully under control and you never have to worry about matching up to the model name. You know exactly what you're calling and you have more flexibility over it. While we're at it, let's do the same thing for school detail view. So here, I will call this context object name equal to school underscore detail. Now you might be wondering, well, if list takes the model name and then adds an underscore list to it as the default context return, what does detail view return? Well, detail view actually just returns the model lowercase, so that's it. So it would just return school lowercase. List views return school underscore list. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, you can check out the documentation, which actually has a really nice example of this, or you can also just post to the Q&A forums. But the basic idea here is if you're ever confused on what the context was called, you just set it yourself. Context underscore object underscore name equal to whatever you want to call it. All right, so we have our list view, and this returns a list of all the records inside models.school. So coming here, since this is a list, I know I can say for school and schools, and then do something with school.name. Okay, so this is fundamentally different than what we've done before, because usually we would have to have said, grab something from a context dictionary and call .objects.all. But basically, listing is such a common exercise that the list view is doing it automatically in what they're returning to you. Okay, so that's the basics of using the list view for what we need to do. And that's all we're going to do for now with the school list HTML. Now let's come over here to the actual school detail.html. And what we will do is call extends from, and in quotes here we'll pass in basic underscore app slash basic underscore app underscore base dot HTML. Oops. And then let's start off our block. So we'll call block. It's the body block we're calling. And then let's call end block. And in here what we're going to do is play around with the school details. So we'll have a header one that says, in fact, let's put this all in a Jumbotron. You probably noticed throughout the course that I'm kind of a big fan of the way the Jumbotron looks. Probably too much of a big fan. Probably don't want to use Jumbotrons as often as I do, but for teaching, they make things really clear because you get this nice little center Jumbotron. But now, inside this heading one, we'll say, welcome to the school detail page. And here's where we're going to return details about the school. So we'll create heading 2 and say school details. And in paragraphs, what we're going to do is this. We'll have a template tag here. And remember, the context dictionary we returned was called school underscore detail. That's what we defined over here in views.py. I called school underscore detail, which means that's what this is. It's the actual school itself. We don't need to say objects or anything. So what I'm going to do is call the name of the school, and we'll call this name. And then let's add in a couple more things. Remember, the schools also have principals to them. So we'll say principal and inject school underscore detail dot principal. Hopefully I'm spelling everything correctly. If not, we'll have to do a little debugging. Then another paragraph here, and I'm going to call location. And we'll call school detail dot location. Make sure that matches the whatever you call the fields in your models.py file. And then what we're going to do is, actually we'll just leave it like that for now, and we'll come back to this and add some more detail to it later. But here we can see we have those actual details. Now let's go to the urls.py file and set a few things up. Okay, we have the basics set up, so let's match over to our urls.py file and actually make sure everything's working correctly. So underneath our project, we have the project urls.py file. So we'll scroll all the way down. We see URL patterns. We see that original views.index view that we created. We'll keep that for the home page. And what we're going to do is call the URL function, regular expression, caret, and then what we will say is basic underscore app slash, and then we're going to use the include function, which means we actually need to import it. So we'll say include here. Let's get a little space there, save that. And then I'm going to say include basic underscore app dot URLs. And we can provide a namespace for this if we ever need to refer to it later. And we can just call it basic underscore app. So we shall save that. And now what this is going to do is allow us to reach over to the basic apps urls.py file, which we actually haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm right-clicking on my basic app top directory, saying new file, and calling urls.py, just as we've done in the past. And here now our basic application is going to have its own urls.py file. And what we need to do is say from django.conf.urls, import URL, and then I will say from basic, from basic underscore app, import those views. And remember, I'm going to use app name is equal to basic underscore app. And if you don't remember why I'm doing that, it's because in the templates themselves, especially the navbar, if I go over to the base navbar, remember when I'm doing things like this, basic app, list, and then admin, comma, index, etc., that sort of notation can only be done if I remember to set this app name. So now that that's ready to go, we'll say URL patterns is equal to a list. And let's start with just one link here, regular expression, and we'll just show the list view for now. We won't worry about the details page. And let's say, comma, views dot school list view. And remember, we have to say as view because it's a class-based view, and we can give it the name list. So what's the reason for giving it the name? That's for the URL template tag. So here I have the basic app name list. So basic app colon list, that comes back to the base.html file for this, basic app colon list. Hopefully by now you're beginning to see those connections and how everything kind of works together. Let's actually test if this all worked by running the server. I'm going to say Python, let me actually cd first into the advanced section and then cd into our project. Now I'm going to say Python manage.py and then run the server, see if we get any errors. Looks like it's thinking about it. And the error we get is basic app.views has no attribute index view. So I may have accidentally deleted that. Let's come back to our views.py file and make sure I didn't delete it. Whoops, looks like I did. No problem. Luckily, with template view, it's easy to fix. We'll say class index view, and I'm just going to inherit the template view, and I'll set template name equal to index.html. And you can review back to the template view lecture if you want more information about this, but you can see here that basically took care of the problem. So I accidentally deleted this, and I didn't have to. So now I'm going to copy this and put it in my browser. Let's see if everything worked. Okay, here I am at my browser. Looks like the home page is working. We fixed the index view. Good news. Now let's click on schools. And then bingo, welcome to a list of all the schools. One first school, new second school. Perfect. So we can see here that our list view is working correctly. And again, just as a quick reminder of what's actually happening here, usually when we wanted to list through everything in a model, we would have to have called that model.objects.all, etc. What list view does for us is it puts that all in this nice convenient context object name called schools. So then I can just say for blank in schools, then list stuff off of that. So again, listing stuff in your model, every entry is so common that that's already all built in for you in these 3 lines of code here. You connect the model, and you don't even have to say context object name. That's only the option if you want to have your own context. Okay, now let's check out the admin page before we actually talk about the detail view. So I'm going to log back into this, and then Jose test password, perfect. And inside our administration page, if we look at basic app, we have the schools and students. And if I click on students, notice that we never actually set a primary key when we were developing that model. We set a foreign key that matched to the school, but we didn't actually set a primary key. And for this particular application, that kind of actually makes sense. We wouldn't want to set the name of the student as a primary key because students may share names. Sarah may be a common name between 2 girls, and we wouldn't want the model getting confused that we have matching primary keys there. So instead, what we end up doing is not defining one. And if you don't define a primary key, what Django does in the background for you is it sets an ID, which is just a serial number marker. So the first entry you put in is 1, the second entry is 2, second entry is 3, and it just has that unique identifier, that primary key, as a single number, which means we can call .id off of it either for student or for school, since actually for neither of them we set up a primary key. So let's log out. And I'm going to come back to the Atom text editor, do Control-C here. And again, just to reiterate, if I come to models.py, none of these fields did I ever indicate that it was a primary field. The only thing I indicated was that the student had a foreign key in school. But since none of them were actually primary keys or primary fields, then what Django did in the background was set an ID for every entry, which is just a numerical indicator. And we can use that to actually link for a couple things. So this is where we're going to really show off how convenient list views and details views can be. If I come back to school list, what would be nice if I click on the school, then it takes me to the school's particular detail page. And so what we need to do is come to school list, and inside of this h2li, I'm going to pass in an anchor tag. And this anchor tag is going to have the school name as its text. So it's going to say, for school in schools, it's going to list all the schools. So we've already seen that page, but we're actually going to give it href. And what this href is going to be is school.id, which is essentially just a number for that school. So keep that in mind. We're going to use this later with the urls.py with regular expressions in a way that we haven't actually seen before yet. But here we have the school name. That makes sense to us. That's just the name of the school. But it's linking to essentially a number. And we're going to use that in just a second in the urls.py file. But before we do that, we also want to make sure that our details.html file is ready. So school_detail.html. Here I have school details.principal.location. That's looking good as well. What I'm going to say is also list off all the students that this particular school has. So we'll create heading 3 here, and we'll say students. And then the next thing to do once I have students is actually cycle through the students. So if I want to cycle through something, I need to use a for loop. I will say for student, and you can use whatever variable you want. Student is fine for us. And then we'll say in school_detail. Remember, school_detail is that context we're returning from views.py. And I will call .students.all. And then I'm going to just create a paragraph element with the student name, and we'll say, so that, like Mary, Sam, who is, we'll call student.age years old. So we should see something that says Mary, who is 11 years old, etc. And then whenever you have a for loop, you need to end it. And we'll say end for. Now, something you may be wondering is where the heck does .students come from? We know where school_detail comes from. That comes from views, where we just return school_detail. But if we come to .students.all, how do we actually get to that? Well, if you go back to models.py, remember that we added this related name, and that relates the actual school to the students. So we pass it in with a foreign key, and we pass in the related name. So I can call back in my school detail page the actual context of the school .students.all, and it's going to grab anything with that matching foreign key. In our case, all the students who had that related name, students. That sort of notation can be confusing at first, but again, it's really just a related name that's connecting this foreign key with school so that school can be linked to all of the students that belong to that school. So you just call that related name students and then say .all to grab all of them over here in this in school detail.students.all. All right, so we have our school list, and what we need to take care of in the urls.py file is actually working with this school.id, and that's where regular expressions are going to help us a lot. I'm going to come over here to the applications urls.py file, and inside of this, what I'm going to do is, whoops, this is the projects urls.py file. I want my applications, perfect. Okay, so inside of this, what I'm going to do is the following. And this is going to seem almost a little alien if you feel uncomfortable with regular expressions, but I'm going to try to explain to the best of my ability what's actually happening here. So we'll say caret, and then in parentheses, I'm going to pass in question mark, capital P, and then the less than and greater sign, and then inside of that, we'll pass PK, square brackets, dash, backslash, W, and then we'll say plus. That all goes inside the parentheses, and then we'll say /$ And then we'll say views dot school detail view, and then pass that in as _view. So we hadn't actually been looking at that detail page yet. Now we're going to link it. And then we'll say name is equal to detail. And we'll save that. Okay, so what is actually happening here? Well, essentially what we're doing is when someone comes to that school list page, when someone actually clicks on this school's name in that list view, the href is just going to essentially return a single number, the actual number that corresponds as a primary key, or in other words, a PK, primary key. Then if we go to our urls.py file, inside of our application, that's this guy, the primary key that we're actually grabbing. And what we're going to be able to do is link to that school's particular detail view. Now back here under URL patterns, basically what we're saying with this regular expression is grab the basic app extension of the domain name / and then whatever this number happens to be for the primary key, and take that in as the school details view. And let me make sure that I have a comma here separating these two guys. Looks like I need to add one in, so we'll have a comma there. Save that, and now we have the school list view, and we should also have the detail view for that particular school. So I will save that, and if this regular expression is really confusing, don't worry. It's usually something that you kind of reference the documentation for. I would never expect someone to have this memorized right off the bat unless they work with regular expressions all the time. But As you get more and more used to particular patterns in your code and web design, there are certain regular expressions that you're going to find yourself kind of memorizing. For instance, we probably already memorized the basic home page, which is just that caret $sign. Okay, so let's actually run this. We'll say Python manage.py, run server, hit enter, and let me bring up the browser. Okay, so here we are at the home page. Looks like that's working. Let's come over to schools. And now we see that all the schools are actually links. So we can click on the first school, and it says, welcome to the school detail page. It's kind of large since I'm zoomed in here a little bit, and it's a Jumbotron. But here we see the school details, and we've looped through all the students in that school. Said Mikey, who was 10 years old, John, who was 12 years old. Perfect. We can come back to schools, try it with new second school, and same thing. Here we see the second school details, Mrs. Smith, New York, and we see Lauren and Sarah. So remember, back when we were setting up the database, it was female students for the new second school. So it looks like everything's matching up perfectly. And those are the basics of how you can use a list view and a detail view. So jumping back to views.py, kind of the whole point of this is that you can quickly use list view and detail view instead of having to play around with those model.objects.all, etc. We saw that we had to do a little bit of that with the detail view, but basically none of that with the list view. And you can always specify the context object name that you want to return. All right. Hope you found this useful, and I will see you at the next lecture where we begin talking about CRUD applications.
இந்த வீடியோவை லைக் பண்ணுங்க, ஷேர் பண்ணுங்க, கமெண்ட் பண்ணுங்க. மேலும் அப்டேட்ஸ்க்காக எங்க லோக்கல் தமிழ் ட்ரெண்ட்ஸ் சேனலை சப்ஸ்கிரைப் பண்ணுங்க.